Welcome back to my studio. This is day 5 of episode 5 of my daily art vlog. What I'm going to talk to you about today is how to get started selling your artwork. In particular, something that really worked well for me, which was having a studio open house. Now, this was something that I started a number of years ago, and it has gone from just selling a few paintings and making a couple $1,000s to now where it's one of the biggest events of the year. Last year at my autumn open house, we did $50,000 in sales. So the potential to really generate huge sales at an open house, you really just can't discount it. So if you're interested in starting to sell your work and doing a studio open house is something that you might be interested in doing, then stick around and I'm going to go into great detail about what I have done and what works for me for a studio open house. So for everybody who paints, eventually the time comes where you start thinking about maybe I should sell my work, or I'd like to sell my work and start selling my work. And it gets very confusing about how do you go about doing that. So I'm going to kind of break this down about when it's time to start selling your work, how you go about selling your work, how you price your work, and specifically I'm going to focus on doing a studio open house. That's something that I have coming up actually a week from today is my Mother's Day studio open house, where we have an open house for our Giclée reproductions. So also during the course of the week, I can kind of, from time to time, we can kind of just touch base with how my preparations for that are going. But before we talk about the open house, one thing that's really important is about when is it time to start considering selling your work? Because just because you've created a piece of work, art does not mean that it has any value or that anyone would want it. I know a lot of times people start painting and they start painting as a hobby, and very quickly, they get caught up in this whole thing with other people in their art association where there's an art festival and they want to start selling their work before they've really gotten any good. I mean, let's be frank about it. It would be like if you started playing golf and you had only just, spent a couple hours on the driving range and played 5 rounds of golf, and all of a sudden you wanted to start earning money based on your golf ability. It would be ridiculous and laughable, yet people seem to want to do this with art. So let's just be clear that art, getting really good at painting or creating any kind of art, takes many, many years of hard work to achieve the skills, to achieve the theoretical knowledge, to explore your creativity and have the experience to where you can get to create great pieces of art. Now, if you want to create a career around art, you need to be able to create great work with a unique voice. But even with a little bit of training and a little bit of practice, people can produce moderately competent decorative pieces of work. And that often is what you see out there. And there is a place for that in people's homes. People have a desire for it. So that's where I'm going to kind of direct this to. And when you know that it's time to start selling your work is when people start asking you for pieces, or people start asking you for pieces for gifts, or when people ask to commission a piece from you, or they see a piece and they want to buy it. They want to know how much it is. But if people are seeing your art and nobody's really interested in it and no one's asking you if they can have it, then just kind of assume you're not at the stage yet where you want to consider selling. Because when you start selling your work, you have to consider a couple things. There's the value of the work, and then there's the price of the work. Now you, as the artist and as the seller, you get to determine the price of the work, but the public determines the value of the work. And when you're first starting out, quite frankly, the value of the work is not even zero, it's -0. It's where people wouldn't even take it if you were to give it to them for free. And that's normal. It's like anything that we start at. Nobody starts good at this. But when your work is at a certain stage where people are showing an interest, then you have to come up with pricing. That's kind of one of the most important things when you're starting out, is how do you determine your price? And I've got a really simple formula for that, is What you want to do always, and I still go by this, if you want to have lots of sales, if the first thing you need to determine is what is the value of your work? What does the public feel it's worth? And then you want to price it just under that. If you can price your work just under what the public believes is the value, then you will sell lots of paintings. If you price it just over what the public deems the value to be, you could potentially sell no paintings. So how do you go about determining the value? Well, the best thing that I found when you're starting out is go to other art festivals, art shows, studio tours, what have you, and you want to try and find another artist who is basically at the same level you're at. So in terms of their experience is the same as yours, their CV or bio is the same as yours in terms of where they are as an emerging artist, and the quality of the work is similar to yours, and the type of client that it would appeal to would also be similar to yours. And then you want to see, are they selling? Or find someone in that realm who is actually selling. And then I would start out undercutting that price by 20%. Because when you first start out, you really want to sell a lot of your work as quickly as you can. Because what's going to happen if you're serious about pursuing an art career, your work is going to get better and better and better. And as the law of diminishing returns goes, at the beginning, it's going to get better faster. And what you don't want to have is paintings kicking around 2 years from now that you did now, because hopefully your work is going to be significantly better and that work is going to pale in comparison and you're not going to be able to show it. So you're better to underprice your work and move lots of work than to overprice it and have it sticking around, because if once it sticks around a certain amount of time, you're going to have it forever because it's just not going to be as good as the work that you're doing a year or 2 years from now. And let's be clear too, when you're starting out, your time is worth nothing. You cannot think in terms of an hourly wage for the art that you have created. That's like wondering how much money you're going to get paid for going out in the driving range and hitting balls, or if you are a hockey player, for going out and skating murders, red line, blue line, red line, blue line. You have to do the work to get to the point where you can do the performance. In sports, the performance is playing at the highest level in the professional leagues. In painting, the performance is doing work where you're fairly compensated for it. But you have to invest many, many hours, and I'm talking thousands of hours, in doing the work and doing dedicated practice to gain the skills, the concepts, and explore your creativity to get to the point where you're doing that kind of work. But along the way, you can get compensated somewhat for the early pieces, but you can't think in terms of how much you're making an hour right now when you're starting out. This, if you're going to have a career as an artist, this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So you want to think in terms of where you're going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. You cannot think about how much you're making an hour right at the start, because if you did, you would just quit. But you have to think that is basically practice, and you're actually getting paid for your practice once you get to the point where you can start selling your work. So that's the whole thing, is developing a reasonable price point for your work. And when you're talking about pricing your work, you also need to be consistent with your pricing. So a 24 by 24, if it's an oil on canvas, should be the same price as another oil on canvas 24 by 24. You don't want to get in the habit of you saying, well, this piece is better than that piece, so therefore it's going to be worth more money. There should be a bar of quality that everything hits, and once it goes above that and it's suitable to be viewed, then similar pieces of similar size should be the same price. Now that there are some exceptions to that. So even when I first started, my portraits, which is what I was really known for and which took an inordinate amount of time compared to my landscapes, they were significantly more expensive. But you could justify that. But you don't want to have two landscapes side by side and have one twice as much as the other because you think it's a better piece. Because someone else may like that other piece, but then when they see that you've priced it less, they're going to think, well, what's wrong with this piece? Oh, I really like it, but apparently he doesn't think it's very good because it's priced half of the other one. So that's in terms of, so we've covered, when is it time to start selling your work and how do you come up with the pricing? And then when you want to start selling your work, for me, the very first thing that I had was a studio open house. And this is a really kind of nice, easy way to kind of slide in to selling your work, because probably it's going to just be open to your family and friends and acquaintances or co-workers. And so these are all people who hopefully also support your dream of kind of pursuing your art career. They're going to want to come and support you. And it's a very kind of supportive environment where you're not going to be ridiculed or anything like that. So if you've decided I'm going to have an open house, what I would recommend is, again, at first, just keeping it to people who you know. And then you have to decide when are you going to have it? Well, what I've found, there's two really ideal times during the year to have a studio open house. One is right about now. So this is a week, mine's actually happening on Mother's Day, but this is a yucky time of year. It's raining out there now. It's not yet summer, but it's not still winter. It's just that the ground's all soggy. It's often too wet to golf. People haven't started doing lots of yard work. They haven't gone to their cottages yet. So that early spring or late winter, and also March break is far enough behind that people have recovered from whatever they've spent on their vacations. So this whole kind of time here, right at the end of April, beginning of May, is a really good time because there's not an awful lot going on. And the other time of year that's like that is late November into early December. For the same reason, it's kind of golf season's over. People aren't going to their cottages, but they're not yet skiing. But also in the fall, people are thinking of Christmas presents. So that can be really effective in terms of the timing of having your studio open house. So you've decided it's time to start selling your work. You've set up the pricing. You've kind of thought about when you're going to have it, and then how do you go about announcing it? Well, when I did my first one, this was back in 20 years ago, it was all invitations that I had printed up and mailed out to people. What I would suggest now is just via email, Facebook, any social media, but where you can control who it goes to. So it's not out to the greater public, unless that's something that you want. But I recommend kind of for your first one, just keeping it to people you know is a pretty good idea. So you've set the date. You want to give yourself lots of time as well. Like I really recommend kind of like 6 months minimum. If you decide you're going to have one until when you announce it, you want at least 6 months lead time, because you want to have time to get a hold of everybody that you are planning on inviting, and you want also to have enough time to do all the things you need to do to get ready. And the most important thing is to do the work. And so just setting out the announcement that you're having a studio open house, which is a show and sale of your work at your home, that's going to put pressure on you to create the work. And you don't want to kind of have a show and then have people come and you've only got 3 paintings there. One of the other things you want to decide is, first of all, how many pieces you're going to have and how much of your house is going to be open to the public. So for me now, this is a really big deal. So we basically open up the basement level and the main level of the house. The entire house becomes a gallery. But when you're starting out, you might want to limit it to just 1 or 2 rooms. But however much space you need to display the artwork effectively. So you've done all the planning, you've done all the invitations, and now you're getting ready to actually start putting your show together at your house. There's a few things you want to keep in mind. When you hang the work, you want to have kind of similar themed pieces hanging together in certain areas of the home. So when you start out, if you are like me, I did watercolor, I did oils, I did acrylic, I had portraits, I had landscapes, I had still lifes. You want to try and group the work together. You don't want to have a hodgepodge of everything all over the place. So you need to think about that when you're actually hanging or displaying the work. And you also want to have price tags clearly visible. I know there's a thought that, oh, don't put the prices on there, let people ask you out. In my experience, that is horrible advice. People assume if you haven't put a price tag on there that it's going to be very expensive, and they'll just assume that it's too expensive and they'll walk away. Again, that whole thing between the value and the price of the work, if people can just look and immediately say, oh, I really like that. And if they look at the price and you've priced it effectively and they say, oh, I actually thought it would be more than that, then you're very likely to get a sale. So you need to have your price tags on there. And then you also need to have a way of paying for the work. Now that's so much easier now than it was when I first started out. So there are all kinds of e-commerce options available, whether it's Squared. We actually, through our bank, we have a point of sale, small terminal that also goes through the phone. But you do need, I would recommend having some sort of credit card option. The first few years that I did my open house, we did cash or check only. And when we finally went to accepting credit cards, our sales went way, way up. Because if it's cash or check, the person has to have the money in their account right now. But if it's a credit card, they can buy it now and pay the credit card company later. So yeah, I really recommend having a credit card option. You also want to think in terms of having bubble wrap or something else there to wrap up pieces as people buy them. And this is something that I've found for me, especially if it's an original, so in the fall when I do my open house, if someone buys an original, I want it wrapped up and out of my house right away. Because what has happened initially, I said, no, I want to keep everything here. I want people to see the show. And usually at the beginning too, there's kind of a big variance in the quality of the work. And you might have one or two pieces that are clearly the best pieces in the show. And they usually sell first. And then what would happen if those are still on display, people would come, they'd fall in love with one of the best pieces, but then they'd see that it was sold and they'd kind of lose interest in anything else. And so then they wouldn't buy anything else. So for me, once it's sold, I want it out of here. I only want people making decisions based on what they see that's available. So that's worked for me. The other thing, I guess I should mention too, there are studio tours. So that's another way of kind of easing into this when you're part of a studio tour. I've never been a fan of those for a couple of reasons. So first of all, if you're starting out and you do a studio tour, you're going to have a lot of strangers coming through your house. So that's kind of up to you and your comfort level there. But also on a studio tour, people are out for a day's entertainment. Often they're out just kind of looky-loos, just looking at different artists' work. And even if they are interested in buying, it often depends on what's the last place they stop for the day. If someone comes to your studio at the very start of the day and they're going to 20 other studios, even if they fall in love with your work, it's very unlikely that they're going to come back at the end of the day to buy it. Whereas when it's your studio open house that you alone have organized and it's your clients or friends that are invited, anyone that buys that day, they're going to buy my stuff. They're not going somewhere else to look at someone else's art. So while it's a lot more work to develop the clientele and your mailing list over the years, I've found that the rewards are certainly worth it. Because, as I say, last year we did 50,000 in sales in a weekend. I'd never heard of anybody on a studio tour doing even close to that. And as I say, if they're coming to my studio open house, if they're going to buy art that day, they're going to buy it from me. They're not going anywhere else. And then finally, I guess you need to think about refreshments if you're going to have any. Now, we actually put on a really kind of nice spread here. We have wine, we have cheese and crackers and kind of little nibblies, and I have found that that's really good. It just helps add to the ambiance of the day. And there's just something about having a glass of wine and looking at art that goes really well together. Now, you need to obviously monitor the situation, but you also need to be aware of the local laws wherever you are in terms of serving alcohol. But if it's in your own private residence, at least here where I am, you're fine. If you're doing it out at a venue you've rented, then you've got different issues and possibly need a special occasion permit for the liquor license. So that's kind of the basics of kind of when it's time to create your own studio open house and sort of things to consider. I'm going to now kind of take you around my house and show you the state that it's in now. Now, this is the absolute messiest my house ever gets. So we just finished my show at the Chinese Cultural Center a week ago. So the house is always in a shambles getting ready for a show. And then I was at the gallery every day for a week. And then after a show, all the work comes back. And so right now, you will see I have an incredible amount of work to do over the next 7 days to get this place ready for the open house. And I know Diane is cringing that I'm going to show you the state our house is in now, but the one thing I kind of decided right off the bat when I was starting this vlog is I was going to be authentic. I'm not going to put on a clean, fresh shirt every day and do absolutely perfect lighting and things like that. I'm just going to show up. If I'm painting, I'm going to be in my paint shirts, because if I have to do all kinds of other stuff before I start shooting, I'm never going to get this vlog done and on air. So I'll stop this now and I'll take you around the house, and then I'll explain to you what I have to do, and you'll see the before, which is now, and the after, which will be later this week. Okay, so first, let's take a look at my studio. Now, this room is always a mess. I seem to thrive on chaos. So about every 2 or 3 weeks, I will give it a good solid clean from top to bottom. But for the most part, when I'm in here, I don't even hit the garbage can half the time when I throw my Q-tips on the floor. So you can see this room is not a pristine artist studio. This whole room is going to get transformed. This is going to be where our sales are going to take place. So we'll have this room set up to handle all the sales and wrapping of the work. And then into our kitchen. This is the area of the house that I pretty much have not yet fully kind of taken over. So we will have paintings on all the walls here in the kitchen. And then into our family room, we also will have this room full of paintings of giclées. I'm actually going to have several originals, I think, here. These are all originals sitting on the fireplace. I had a client come out last week, so I had some of this out to display. But maybe this room will be originals, but the rest of the entire house will be giclées. So now let's go to the front room, which is a bit of a total disaster. So here's the front entry of our house. And again, we'll have painting or giclées on all the walls in here. And this room here, this is where we actually do our printing, and we have our a lot of our print inventory in here. But these are all of the things that came back from the Chinese Cultural Center show. So there's probably 40 pieces stacked up here. And I haven't had a chance to put away the bubble wrap from the originals that got unwrapped. So this whole room as well will be converted into a gallery space. And now we will tackle the basement, which is the worst of all. So as we come down the basement stairs, we actually have a beautifully finished basement. It is just incredibly cluttered right now. So you can see here I have a hanging system with the cables and hooks. That makes it a lot easier. But back here we have a lot of our cardboard boxes that we use when we're shipping stuff. We've got the old remnants of a gym that I'm getting rid of, and a lot of my photography equipment. And then over on the other side, we just have an incredible amount of stuff. There's about 6 or 7 easels. There's some giclées stacked against the wall. And we have on the far wall, we have the rack where we hang our giclées once they're printed before they get stretched. So this entire area will be totally cleaned out. Every surface on the walls will be covered with giclées. So as you can see, I've got an incredible amount of work ahead of me to get this house ready to have an art show and sale. So I probably won't be doing any more painting for the rest of the week, at least not until I get the house ready. I usually leave my studio as the last thing that I clean up, so that if I do finish ahead of time, I can maybe get one more day of painting done. But I will still be producing the vlog. Over the next couple days, I'm actually going to be talking about my story, about how I went from being a kid who liked to draw to being a starving artist, to then being a police officer for 18 years, and then finally now to where I'm a very successful artist, kind of living my dream. And the one thing that I found very helpful for me when I was starting out was the stories of other artists, how they went from being just a kid who liked to draw, of which there's hundreds of thousands, to being one of the few who actually gets to live their dream and pursue a successful art career. So we'll talk about that tomorrow. So as always, if you like this, then please give it a thumbs up, share with your friends, subscribe, and I welcome your comments and questions. And I'm Tim Packer. I thank you for your time, and I will see you tomorrow.